The dust swirled around her worn boots, kicked up by the relentless desert wind that seemed to carry whispers of forgotten battles. Sarah Jenkins, a woman whose face bore the gentle etchings of 60 years, lived with quiet dignity, adjusted the faded scarf over her head, shielding her eyes from the glare of the setting sun. She clutched a small, woven basket, its contents a simple offering, freshly baked bread and a thermos of hot, sweet tea. Her destination was the perimeter fence of Fort Jericho, a sprawling military base that sprawled like a scar across the arid landscape. For years, Sarah had made this pilgrimage. Every Tuesday and Friday, without fail, she would walk the 2 miles from her small, isolated homestead to the base's outer edge. She never tried to enter, never caused trouble. She simply stood there, a silent sentinel, watching the comings and goings of the soldiers, a flicker of something unreadable in her deep-set eyes. Sometimes, a young recruit on patrol would offer a hesitant wave, which she would return with a soft, almost imperceptible nod. Most times, she was just a part of the landscape, an old woman with a basket easily overlooked. Today, however, was different. A new guard, fresh-faced and rigid with newfound authority, stood by the gate. He was young enough to be her grandson, his uniform crisp, his posture ramrod straight. As Sarah approached the designated unofficial viewing spot, he held up a hand. "Ma'am, you need to step back. This is a restricted area." His voice was firm, but held a slight tremor of inexperience. Sarah stopped, her gaze steady. "I mean no harm, son. Just here to watch the sunset, same as always." Her voice was soft, raspy with age, yet carried an undeniable calm. "Orders are orders, ma'am. New regulations. No unauthorized personnel near the fence. You'll have to leave." He gestured vaguely back the way she came. A sigh escaped Sarah's lips, a sound of weary acceptance. She had anticipated this. The base had been on higher alert lately, the news filled with distant conflicts. She understood the need for security, even if it meant disrupting her quiet ritual. "Very well," she said, turning slowly. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. She felt a pang of disappointment. This was her connection, her silent vigil. Just as she began to walk away, a voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the wind. "Hold it right there, Private. What's going on here?" A figure emerged from the shadows of the guardhouse, tall and imposing. Major Thomas Hammer Hansen, the base's provost marshal, was a man forged in the crucible of combat. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and observant, missing nothing. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, a stickler for rules, but with an underlying current of empathy that few saw. The young private snapped to attention. "Major Hansen, sir. Just enforcing the new perimeter regulations." This civilian was loitering. Hansen's gaze swept over Sarah, taking in her simple clothes, her basket, the quiet dignity in her posture. He'd seen her before, a fleeting glimpse from his patrol vehicle, the old woman by the fence. He knew she was harmless, but regulations were regulations. "Ma'am, I apologize, but the private is correct. We've had to tighten security. You can't be this close to the perimeter anymore." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Turt." Sarah turned back, her eyes meeting his. There was no defiance in her gaze, only a profound sadness. "I understand, Major. Times change. As she spoke, the wind picked up, tugging at her scarf. It slipped, revealing a glimpse of her neck and shoulder. And there, just beneath the collar of her worn blouse, Hansen saw it. A flash of intricate, dark blue ink against her aged skin. It was a tattoo, a complex knot of lines and symbols, partially obscured by her clothing. But even in that fleeting moment, something about it snagged his attention. It wasn't a common design. It looked military. Hansen, a man who had served multiple tours in various conflict zones, had seen countless tattoos, unit crests, mottos, dates, symbols of brotherhood and sacrifice. But this was different. It looked ancient, almost tribal, yet undeniably connected to something he recognized in the deepest recesses of his soldier's mind. "Ma'am, your scarf," he said, his voice hesitant, his eyes fixed on the glimpse of ink. Sarah, realizing her scarf had slipped, quickly pulled it back into place, a flicker of something akin to alarm in her eyes. "Just a bit windy," she murmured, turning to leave again. "Wait." Hansen's voice was sharper now, a command. He took a step closer, his military instincts kicking in. "That tattoo, can I see it?" Sarah hesitated, her shoulders tensing. It's nothing major, just an old mark." "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've seen a lot of old marks that looked familiar. Can you please show me?" His tone was insistent, a blend of curiosity and professional duty. He had a gut feeling, a prickle of intuition that told him this wasn't just any tattoo. After a long moment, Sarah, slowly, reluctantly, reached up and pulled her scarf down, revealing her left shoulder and the upper part of her arm. What Major Hansen saw made him freeze. The tattoo was breathtaking in its detail, a masterpiece of intricate linework and symbolic imagery. It depicted a soaring eagle, its wings spread wide, clutching a thunderbolt. Beneath the eagle, a stylized shield bore a single, powerful word in an ancient script, a word that pulsed with an almost tangible energy. And encircling the entire design was a wreath of olive branches, intertwined with barbed wire. But it wasn't just the design that stunned him. It was the placement, and the context. This wasn't a modern tattoo. The ink had faded over decades, the lines softened, but the artistry was undeniable. It looked like something from a different era, a different world. More importantly, it was the exact emblem of the Ghost Eagles, a legendary, highly classified special operations unit from World War II. A unit so secret, so effective, that their existence was still officially denied by most governments. A unit whose members were rumored to be ghosts, appearing and disappearing behind enemy lines, leaving only whispers and impossible victories in their wake. The air symbol, the eagle with the thunderbolt and the ancient word, was known only to a select few in the highest echelons of military intelligence. And even fewer knew about the barbed wire intertwined with the olive branches, a grim reminder of their dual mission, peace through extreme measures. Hansen's mind reeled. He had studied military history obsessively. He knew the legends, the declassified fragments, the whispers that circulated among elite forces. The Ghost Eagles were myth, a whispered tale of impossible feats. And their emblem, tattooed on the shoulder of a simple, elderly woman standing outside Fort Jericho, was a direct contradiction to everything he believed about their history. That's real," Hansen breathed, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with disbelief. He reached out a hand, almost instinctively, but stopped himself before touching her. The ghost eagles, that's their emblem. How do you have that? Sarah's gaze was unblinking. The sadness in her eyes had deepened, replaced by a flicker of something ancient, something that spoke of profound loss and unimaginable experience. It's real, Major. Every line of it. The young private, bewildered, looked between his commanding officer and the old woman, completely lost. Hansen, however, was no longer thinking about regulations or loitering. He was thinking about history, about sacrifice, about secrets buried deep. Were you a part of that unit, ma'am? He asked, his voice filled with a reverence he hadn't known he possessed. Sarah slowly nodded. I was. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and impossible. A woman, a simple woman, who looked like she spent her days baking bread and tending a garden, was a living legend. A ghost from a forgotten war. But the ghost eagles were all men, Hansen stammered, recalling the sparse, heavily redacted files he'd seen. And they were all lost in action, presumed dead. A faint, bitter smile touched Sarah's lips. Presumed, yes. Easier that way. For everyone. She pulled her scarf back up, covering the tattoo, as if the brief exposure had been enough. Now, if you'll excuse me, Major, I have a long walk home. Hansen didn't move. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile the image of the frail woman with the legend of the ghost eagles. He knew the stories. They were the ones who went into the darkest places, performed the most suicidal missions, and never came back. Yet, here she was. Ma'am, he said, his voice urgent. You can't just walk away. This is extraordinary. Who are you? Sarah turned fully to face him. Her eyes, though aged, held a sharpness that belied her years. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I was a field operative, codenamed Shadow, for the Ghost Eagles. I was the one who went where no man could, who saw what no man should, and I was the one who came back. Her words were delivered with a quiet authority that silenced Hansen. He felt a chill run down his spine, despite the desert heat. I was the one who disarmed the chemical weapon in the Black Forest, Major. The one who extracted the atomic scientist from the heart of Berlin. The one who sabotaged the V-2 rocket launch sites, buying precious time for the invasion. Her voice was flat, devoid of boast, simply stating facts. And I was the one who was left behind, presumed dead, because my mission was too sensitive. My knowledge too dangerous to ever be officially acknowledged. Hansen stared at her, speechless. He knew those operations. They were the stuff of classified legend, impossible missions that had turned the tide of the war, attributed to phantom forces or sheer luck. To hear them recounted, so casually, by this unassuming woman, was mind-bending. Why are you here, ma'am? He finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. After all these years, why are you coming to the base perimeter? Sarah looked out at the sprawling military installation, her gaze distant, filled with a profound melancholy. Because this is where the new ones come, the young ones. Full of fire, full of hope, and I watch them. I watch them go, and I watch them come back. Or not. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. It's my penance, Major. My way of remembering. My way of honoring the ones who didn't get to come home. Hansen felt a lump form in his throat. He understood now. This wasn't just an old woman loitering. This was a veteran, a hero, carrying the weight of a secret war, performing a silent, solitary vigil for the fallen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to stand outside. You're a hero, a legend. We can get you access. We can honor you." Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, Major. No honors. No fanfare. That life is long behind me. The world changed, and I changed with it. I chose this quiet life. This is enough." She looked at him, a faint knowing smile touching her lips. "Besides, some secrets are best kept, for the good of all." She then looked at the young private, who was still standing at rigid attention, his eyes wide with confusion. "Private," she said, her voice gentle, "you were just doing your duty. And that's all any soldier can do." She turned to leave again, the setting sun casting her silhouette against the horizon. "Ma'am," Hansen called out, a desperate plea, at least. "Let us offer you something. A ride." "Camille." Sarah paused, then slowly turned back. She looked at the basket in her hand, then at Hansen, a glimmer of her old self, perhaps, in her eyes. "Actually, Major," she said, her voice a little stronger, "I did bake a fresh loaf of sourdough, and I made some sweet tea. It's still warm. Perhaps you and the private would share it with me. Just here, by the fence. Before I go." Hansen looked at the young private, who was still trying to process the impossible revelation. Then he looked back at Sarah, at the quiet strength in her gaze, at the weight of history she carried. "It would be an honor, ma'am," he said, his voice humble. And so, as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in a deep twilight, Major Thomas Hansen, a decorated officer, and a bewildered young private sat on the dusty ground beside the perimeter fence of Fort Jericho. They shared warm bread and sweet tea with an unassuming old woman whose skin bore the indelible mark of a forgotten war. A woman who was not just a simple civilian but a living legend, a silent guardian of secrets, and a testament to the unseen heroes who walk among us. The wind still whispered, but now, it seemed to carry not just the dust, but the echoes of a history that had finally, if only for a brief, sacred moment, been shared. And as Sarah finished her tea, she looked at the young private, then at Major Hansen, a flicker of peace in her eyes. Her vigil was complete, for today, she had seen the future, and she had shared a piece of her past. And as she walked back into the encroaching darkness, the base, and the men within it, were forever changed by the simple woman and her impossible tattoo.